So next, we have the opportunity to hear from David Kunhardt.
Thank you.
In our conversation so far and in the active conversation that we had together, we spent time really talking about the design idea and development. We spent time talking about equity. We spent time talking about our real estate market and real estate stakeholders. We spent time knitting together what our ideas were, where they converged and where they diverged. And in part, the conversation that we're offering you all the opportunity to have with each other is about knitting together new ideas and old ideas with old friends or with new folks that you're sitting next to, and thinking about what happens as you integrate those ideas. David and I, in our conversation about generational marking things, talked about different aspects of technology. The typewriter was instituted when I was in college, and all papers had to be done and typewritten, which was a huge change from the first 2 years of college for me. And we talked about different ways, the same theme, technology, but how it hit us differently. So we offer you another opportunity to think about the economy in a different way. So David's background is in the solar industry. Since 2008, he's been both an investor and part of a solar company. And before that, David did quite a bit of work with Transamerica, looking at real estate partnerships in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion. But many of us know him as a local volunteer with CALM around affordable housing, the Marin Workforce Housing Trust, and Sustainable Marin. So we offer you the opportunity to think about the economy and the tools that support us all around housing and how we continue to use them well and maybe better as we think about housing choices. David.
Thank you very much, Chantal. I would like to put a little bit more fine point on the description of who I am and where I came from. About 30 years in real estate, 24 years in the specific area of community development using the low-income housing tax credit and other tools, a historic tax credit, new markets tax credit, and other federally generated tools to revitalize and build good communities. That all came to an end for me when I deliberately got into the sustainable area of solar in actually late 2007 and first paying job in early 2008. But I have all this knowledge that I've got to use somehow, and one of the reasons why several of us got together and formed CALM is that we have a lifetime of knowledge in transportation, in environment, in finance and government and law, and we saw a lot of misinformation being pumped out there. And we thought, there's got to be the facts, as Cesar said, let's have a conversation that's based on fact and compromise and not on fears. And we thought we've got to use our expertise, our historic expertise, but I want to make very clear, I do not possess any real estate other than the home that my wife and I own. And tonight is my 31st anniversary, so please give me a little bit of time. I don't own any multifamily real estate. I'm not an investor. I'm not in the multifamily development business. I don't want to be again in that area. But I did invest a lot of money on behalf of a major national corporation in properties like some of the ones that I'm going to include. That's another image, actually, of Santa Clemente Place. Now, that was a case of I competed to invest in it, and I lost the opportunity because it was so popular for various different investors. The development by EAH, and it is 30 units to the acre. I did, though, do a YIMBY in Corte Madera. I'm a resident of Corte Madera. I testified, I don't know, a dozen times in front of planning and city council to get this thing approved and built. Let's jump right into the hard economics. And one of the things that's kind of fogged over out there is, there's nothing that's really affordable in Marin. Well, there really is. And does this happen to have a laser pointer on it by any chance? Top button. The top button like this. Yes, there you go. Okay. Bless you. So this is the economic continuum from zero income to well over median, and median, according to the housing element for a family of four, is $97,100 in 2014. And what different types of housing are served or serve those different levels? Well, in general, you need some sort of supportive housing solution to support the extremely low and very low income folks. It's just the case because rental housing is out of reach, and certainly home ownership is out of reach. And rental housing tends to serve a very broad range, and home ownership really doesn't pick up until you get up well over median income. But the low-income housing tax credit program that I'm going to talk about, which is the only major affordable production program that we have in this country, serves a very specific group. There's no hard bottom end, but there's a hard top end, which is 60% of median income. 60% of median income. It's got nothing to do with median income at 97. It's more like 53, 50 to 55. And that is a hard stop. And in fact, most of the allocations of those credits are made to properties that serve 50% and below. Okay, what does this mean and how much money is going there? Well, in the federal system, there's about $8 billion a year that goes to that low-income housing tax credit program, this big production program. And every year, there is approximately, very hard number to measure, $20 billion that goes to the capital gains deferral. This isn't the same as the Prop 60. This is the one time, for those over 55, you get to defer the gain on your house and sell it for a profit and not have to pay personal income tax on it. There is also, thanks to the federal tax code, about $28 billion that's expended in not all states, only the states that have property tax, a property tax deduction. It's worth about $28 billion a year. And mortgage interest for first and second homes costs us in the federal level about $85 billion a year. So yes, there are a lot of tax subsidies that go to housing, and they're all on the upper end. In fact, homeowners enjoy about a 17-to-1 ratio of their benefits to the low-income housing tax credit, 17-to-1. Is all of that wrong? No. We have a great, great tradition of supporting home ownership. And it is the household's biggest savings account. It is my biggest savings account in Corte Madera. In my hillside bungalow in Corte Madera, it's still my biggest savings account. And so what is the sort of scale of all the different things? Because there's also a lot of fog. I remember somebody came up to me when they saw WinCup being built, and they said, you know, that Section 8 property over there. Wait a minute. It's actually, it is a market rate property, and Section 8 only serves certain purposes in a very small number of cases for actual properties. And a lot of people confuse private housing that is government supported with public housing. They're very different things. And federally, you see the purple column is the total supply of public housing. There's another kind of deeply supported, seniors and disabled, Section 202 and 811, excellent programs that supplies almost all the dollars that are needed for nonprofits to build the very specialized properties. I wish that had more money. It doesn't. We all impoverish HUD's ability to write checks. What we'd like to do is, and then historically there's a lot of private housing that has HUD financing in the form of debt, but it's privately owned housing, not publicly owned housing. And then what is Section 8 really? Most of Section 8 is a voucher for a tenant to go hunt for a market rate unit, and it supports their ability to fit into the market. And then there's the Section 42, the tallest that is now actually still growing. In Marin County, this is a slightly different mix, but on the far left is both public housing and the Marin Housing Authority's other specialized supported units. There's inclusionary rental. There's below market rate home ownership. That's been a pretty good program that's been working for a generation now in Marin. There's a good number of Section 8 vouchers that are hunting for market rate housing and supporting that household. And then there are private affordable units. This is actually, the yellow column is a combination of, I'm going forward, a combination of the green and the yellow in Marin. So we actually have a smaller portion of that privately owned government-supported housing in Marin than exists nationally. Now let's talk about that ratio, and Cesar touched on this a little bit. Nationally, the ratio of homeowners to renters is about 2/3, 1/3. It's actually 65.5 to 34.5. And in Marin, it's closer to 3/4. It's about 71, a little over 71 to 28. Well, what does that mean for the intersect, the knitting together of what we just saw in the subsidies and home ownership? What it really means that is in Marin, there is, in fact, a disproportionately high level of tax subsidies for the homeowners on the top end of the spectrum. Now, the housing industry changed dramatically in 1986 when under President Reagan, waste, fraud, and abuse of individuals taking unlimited losses was taken away. And at the last hours of that legislative change and that tax reform, when individual investments in real estate was taken away, the syndication community that had been growing up since the early 70s said, hey, wait a minute, we can use this syndication tool to continue to support affordable housing, government mission in housing, but we'll do it on the private side, and if you adopt a tax credit, then we can do it with equity and not with debt. And so the low-income housing tax credit program was created, and it's been up for 26 years. It's actually one of the longest-lived private programs of HUD. It is only operative through public-private partnerships, and it is housing for people with jobs. It is not the safety net. It is not public housing. It is not almost all of the time for someone who is without employment. It is for people who have employment. And in Marin, very specifically, it's our high service economy. It's the folks who are in retail, food service, car service, healthcare, daycare, and those are, in fact, the residents of the complexes that I'm going to be also showing. Just a tiny bit more of the change, I think really a sea change in public policy that happened in 86, 87. What was a Washington-centered program, set of Washington initiatives, is now managed by each state in a competitive qualified allocation plan. It's private action. It's private compliance reviewed by accountants and then ultimately by the IRS, not by HUD. It depends upon and requires lender and investor initiatives and is not dependent upon HUD writing checks. And the emphasis really is, for the first time, on market quality of that housing, not on cheapness of that housing. What are some examples? And these are a couple of examples that I caused Transamerica to invest in. Rotary Valley Senior Village out Lucas Valley Road. It is an absolutely wonderful community. I would like to live there. Every single unit has a door from its dining room to a garden. How local is that for bringing your greens into your table? That happens to be the community room on a very hot day when nobody wanted to sit outside. Another one that I did not have the chance to invest in, but the Workforce Housing Trust did put a small critical loan in the front end of this, Warner Creek Senior Homes in Novato. What enforces affordability? Another myth is that, all of these outside rapacious developers can develop and then in 5 years they can run away and not care and let it run down and there's nothing that will come after them. Absolutely not the case. Every single low-income tax credit property in the country has a recorded regulatory agreement that is in the land records and which operates through the investors. And if there are too many failures, that is, any code compliance problems, any fair housing problems, any failure to lease and release to low-income tenants, in that there will be an 8823 form issued to that owner, and if they don't cure it right away, they're going to be punished and their credits are going to come away, and the investor is going to go after the manager, and there is a mechanism for compliance to be enforced. The regulatory agreement also sets forth the depth and affordability of rents. How long are those property restrictions? Nationwide, the requirement is a minimum of 15 years, and there are required extended use agreements, and the absolute minimum really is 18 years before residents can be asked to move on from that private housing that has had a 10-year credit subsidy and compliance for 15 years. In California, where the allocation of these credits is so competitive, the compliance period is 55 years. This is Creekside, one of my proudest investments. It was started 10 years ago this summer, 77 units in Hamilton Field. It filled in 30 days and has been 100% occupied with a waiting list since it was opened up. And it looks better today than it did 10 years ago. This is a duplicate photograph, sorry Colin, but I love the Drake's Way, and I wanted to show this to make the point that often around the country, affordable properties are more handsome than the luxury properties next to them. And if you look at the property next to this one, it is a flat roof, flat-sided, very dense luxury apartment complex that doesn't look anywhere near as good as Colin's design. Another thing that's true, let's summarize some of the key ratios in this program. Let's sort of back up. This is the most important slide, and I'm sorry the lettering is smaller than some of the others, but this is the most important summary of the actual mathematics that operate within that program. The more money you spend, up to a limit. You can't start putting gold fixtures and so forth. There are cost limits ultimately, and there are development fee limits that are tighter now than they've ever been. Development fee limits that are tighter now than they've ever been. But the more you spend generally, the more credits you get. That means quality. Credits are approximately, by math, about 85% of the hard cost of a property, and they flow over 10 years. And guess what? The market, like the company that I used to work for, were paying more than $1 per credit. So here you have a federal subsidy that comes in, and the private industry is paying more than every dollar that the federal government is relieving that company from taxes in order to invest in it. Very efficient program. The debt mix, because more about 75 to 85, 90% sometimes of the money to build it is provided by equity, debt is much smaller. So the burden of debt is much smaller on the property. Also, the more low-income compliance that you have, the more credits that you will get. Thank you. And then the very important rents are set at 30% of the low and very low incomes. So they're 30% of 50% of adjusted median income. And by the investor's private standard, rents have got to be at least 15% under market. In some cases, they're really half of market. Land does not get subsidized. It is a pure drag. The best thing that you can do, if you could thought of anything you might do to help an affordable property get more feasible, you would find a way to reduce the cost of the land that is used in that program. I gotta, even though Kay says my time is up, I just gotta.
She's gonna have me helping her.
that one of the things that nonprofits, which are awarded a disproportionate share of these tax credits by the state, especially in the Bay Area where we have so many great nonprofits, is that they engage in education programs, they have scholarship programs for the students, they serve special needs and special categories, they offer family supports, they have better security because there's a resident manager on hand, and ultimately offer home ownership classes to folks. Sometimes there is daycare, so there's superior amenities. I wanted to make a point about transportation, but I think I've taken too much of the day, and we've already covered this as a matter of fact. So what can I do? What can I do? And this comes back to sort of everybody here. What can I do? Now that I've heard all this, what can I do? Well, let's get out. Every one of our jurisdictions right now is working a housing element, and the county is as well. Let's just pass those along. Those are the messages that the jurisdictions are behind local zoning, that is in favor, that often has been in place for several years, that is in favor of the units that are in that zoning, and that will be applied to the state requirement of housing elements. Affirm your support for projects that have been in those local zoning plans for several years, including Marinwood, including the properties in the Fairfax housing element, including this will be controversial, but including Whistle Stop, including the seminary in Strawberry, which has had multifamily in their local zoning for a lot of years. Affordable homes complete the community. Russell spoke to this economically, and also support Habitat for Humanity and first-time homebuyer programs. Nothing wrong with that. It's not just rental housing. There's some great first-time homebuyer programs that are available, and that is that. Thank you.
Thank you.